Good evening, class. We're so glad you could join us tonight. And I just wanted to give you, excuse me, an announcement. If you're going to look at for us next week, we will not be on Thursday evening next week. We want you to enjoy this time of Thanksgiving with your family and friends. So we will not be having class next week. We do want you to just focus on the things that we have so much to be thankful for. One of those things, obviously, is what? Our salvation. The fact that we know Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. And no matter what it looks around us, there are things that we wish were different, but know this, God's still on the throne, and his hand is still in history, and his hand is still on each and every one of us. And we must never, ever lose sight of that fact. And we are a blessed people because his Spirit dwells in us and lets us know we are his. So enjoy next week. Don't eat too much, but enjoy what you eat. It's kind of that kind of season where all the good stuff is there, right? So enjoy yourself, but be thankful. Okay, we are on page 5 of 33 notes, and we're starting a summary. And this summary, I will just tell you ahead of time, is probably going to be quite lengthy, only because we're going to go back and revisit the present of the tribes. Where are they presently, and that glorious future that is awaiting all of us. So tonight I want us to look at the archaeological evidence for migration of the tribes. Please hear, I'm probably going to keep saying this. The lost tribes of Israel are not lost. God knows where they are. His hand is upon them. It was his plan. He said, I will scatter you among the nations. He told them the direction in which they would be scattered. And what we're going to find out tonight is that the archaeological evidence lines up with the Bible. And there's a reason why I said it the way I said it. It's not that, oh, the Bible lines up with the archaeological evidence. No, this is the foundation of truth. It's the archaeological evidence that lines up with what we know to be truth and which we have always accepted as truth by faith. So, note 18, from the excavations of Celtic burial mounds in Europe to Scythian burial mounds in Siberia, archaeological evidence of the wanderings of the tribes of Israel is abundant. Everywhere you're finding archaeological evidence, you see an abundance of evidence that the tribes were constantly on the move and migrating. Some just because they were nomadic. Their ancestors did spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness. So they were nomadic. The other that many times they got settled and they were pushed out by other groups of people. So the similarities of the Celts and the Scythian cultures are drawn from the assessment of the artifacts that have been found in the different excavation locations. In other words, if you look at the Celtic burial mounds in Europe, and that's obviously in Europe, but there are also Scythian burial mounds in Siberia. How many know Siberia is in the area east of Russia? But when they did the archaeology and they found these artifacts, they found that there was a relationship, very strong relationship, between what they were finding that shows that even though they were found in different excavation locations, there was an identification, there were similarities, and sometimes very, very sameness that they were finding. Now, the Behistun rock inscriptions comprise one of the great archaeological breakthroughs that unlocked many other archaeological finds. And they are found on a cliff face over 300 feet above the valley floor in the Zagros Mountains of modern Iran. So now, if you want to look at your migration map, you can see your migration map will show you the location of Iran. And you can look there and you can say, wow, okay, so there are areas in modern day Iran where they have found inscriptions. And it's the area of the Behistun rock is along the road from Baghdad, Iraq, to Tehran, Iran. So there is a massive inscription and relief carving of King Darius I of the Persian Empire. And this relief, this carved relief, shows images of the people he had conquered. Because, if you're going to conquer somebody, you want to keep that, preserve that, right? That's your victory. And it describes his victories on parallel columns in 3 languages. If you want the world to know, then you're going to record that in 3 languages. And the 3 languages are Old Persian, Susian or Elamite, and Akkadian, which is Assyrian or Babylonian. So it's in the language of, obviously, Persian language, Assyrian, or Babylonian. So it's got all these 3 languages. Now, Sir Henry Rawlinson transcribed the inscriptions discovered and said that the 3 languages were translations of each other. In other words, there are 3 languages saying the same thing. And George Rawlinson, Sir Henry's brother, said the inscriptions were important in scholars being able to read the Assyrian tablets excavated from Nineveh. Now here's why. If they would be able then to translate the inscriptions of Assyrian tablets, of course Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, they could then connect the lost, which are not lost. They are not lost. They are very much alive and well today. Descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel are very alive today. But they can be connected to the Scythians, which we've talked about, the Sak or Sakai, and you don't have that on your, you just have or, and then you have a blank. It's Sakai, S-A-C-A-E, S-A-C-A-E, and Sumerians. Now, what we have already discussed is what? All 3 of these names are morphs of the name Isaac. As that name would be passed on and they would go into different areas and the people would obviously refer to them by that, but they were referring to how they saw that name. And so obviously they were identifying as what? Descendants of Isaac. That was prophesied in the word of God to Abraham. God said to Abraham, "In Isaac your descendants will be named." And they still are. So these are reasonable grounds then because once they found these 3 transcriptions, for regarding the Gemiri, which was the same group of people called, when going somewhere else, they're called something else. The Gemiri or Sumerians, who first appeared in Assyria and Media in the 7th century BC. Well, I guess they would appear in Assyria in the 7th century BC. And the Sakai of the Behistun rock are the same family of people, nearly 2 centuries later. Same people. They did what? They were moving, migrating. And they are as identical with the Beit Qumri. Well, of course they would be the same as the Beit Qumri, House of Qumri. Why? Because the northern kingdom of Israel was called by the Assyrians House of Omri. Beit meaning house. And then what they did was, remember we talked about, it was customary sometimes in different languages to reverse the consonants, reverse the letters. So they're the same people of Beit Qumri of Samaria, or the tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel. So we're beginning to kind of see, okay, that's how they migrated, that's how their names got. They disappeared in one area, turned up in another area under a similar name. So we looked at the archaeological evidence. So they're finding things, and they're saying, okay, things we're getting are telling us this was the same people, families. Now let's look at names evidence. Upon Jacob's repentance, God changed his name from supplanter or heel grabber to Israel. And this word means either prince with God, or I love this one, God governed. Now understand, when you look at Israel, it means God governed. And by the way, there's going to come a day when Yeshua will rule and reign. And talk about God governed. It said he will rule with an iron fist. It's not going to be no sin, no rebellion. During the millennium, if there's any rebellion, it'll be taken care of right away. And we know the ultimate end, at the end of the millennium, it's done away with once and for all. And then we enter into the eternal state. So Jacob, Israel, had 12 sons. Then he adopted Joseph's sons as his own, which brings about 14 individuals, 14 sons. But we know that as we move on, there was a plan and pattern for the tribe of Levi that would descend from Levi. So he adopted Ephraim and Manasseh as his own and said, they're mine. And the blessings he bestowed on Joseph as his son, and we know Joseph was the favorite son of Jacob, Israel. And those blessings went to Ephraim and Manasseh, and basically they got the material blessings of the right of the firstborn, because Reuben forfeited it, Simeon and Levi forfeited it, and then Levi was later in the tribe entrusted with the priesthood. But so we know those good blessings of the primogeniture, the firstborn, went to Ephraim and Manasseh. The tribe of Levi was entrusted with the priesthood. and they lived among the other tribes. They had Levitical cities within the land allotment of the other tribes when they came into the promised land. They had no tribal land allotment. And then Joseph's place was taken by his 2 sons. So each of Jacob, Israel's 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh, became the patriarch of his own tribe. So starts out, there are 12, they're the sons. They each then are the heads of their own tribe, which you call the tribes of Israel. Now, the blessings given to the various tribes by Isaac, Jacob, Israel, and Moses were actually prophetic words. They were actually prophecies. So I want to just tell you that as you do your devotional reading, it would be well to reread Genesis 27. We've looked at it. We've definitely looked at Genesis 48 and 49, and also Deuteronomy 33, because basically they're actually words that are spoken, and when we get to tying all the loose ends we're leaving in our study, we actually get to a point where we get to pull in those threads and put them into a cohesive ball, you're going to find that those prophecies have something to do with where the tribes are today, what kind of people they are, their characteristics, and it all goes back to those prophecies that were spoken about the sons of Jacob, Israel. Any questions, comments? Okay, note 24. The name of Isaac, I-S-A-A-C, who was the father of Jacob, Israel, and the name Omri, O-M-R-I, King Omri, of the northern house of Israel, are 2 key names. And this becomes important. If you're going to begin to research the tribes, where did they go? How did they migrate? When did they migrate? These are the 2 names that you're going to be looking at first, because that's what they're going to be called by. They're the key names by which the lost tribes can be traced through history. Now, many Yehudahites, they're called Jews today, kept their identity as they migrated in the diaspora, which is the dispersion from their homeland of the Jewish people. And while we may speak of one diaspora, they actually were more when they left their homeland. We know that obviously that when Nebuchadnezzar came down and took Jerusalem, the Yehudahites were taken back to Babylon. And when the Medo-Persian Empire overtook Babylon, and the Babylonian king, Cyrus, issued the decree they could go back, rebuild the temple, go back. We know only 50,000 of all those who had been deported to Babylon came back. So they were there. That would have been around 516, and then that would go into the 400 BCs when they rebuilt. And so when Jesus comes on the scene in the 1st century, know that you have also had Yehudahites who have gone somewhere from Babylon. Okay? Many of the people of the kingdom of Judah did not return following the Babylonian captivity. And also the descendants of these people are also somewhere. So they may or may not know who they are. Some of them do not know who they are. Some do. So Isaac's name is found in variations like Saka, Sakai, Scythians, Saxones, Saxons, which should be familiar to you. You've probably heard of the term Anglo-Saxon, which is the commingling of the Angles and the Saxons, and others. Now, the Assyrians, Assyrians, the Assyrians who conquered and deported the northern tribes, were very impressed by King Omri. They were very impressed in the king, because in their cuneiform tablets and other inscriptions, they actually called all of the members of the northern kingdom of Israel by the name of the king Omri. So they called them Bit Omri because in their language, Omri would have been pronounced Gomri, the heart, Gomri, or Bit Kumri, depending on which part of the kingdom of Assyria was calling these people. So they were known by Bit Gomri, because in Israel it would have been what? Beit Omri, house of Omri. They're calling him Bit Gomri or Bit Kumri, house of Omri. So that terminology that the Assyrians gave to these people became known as Kimeri, Kimerian, or Kimri. Again, it would morph as they would migrate to different areas of the Assyrian Empire. So both the Isaac and Omri derivatives applied to these tribal groupings through the centuries. And like I said, we're talking about 2,744 years for the house of Israel. It must be noted that at times, a few, not many, but a few non-Israelite peoples were either allied with, so they, okay, we're going to join with you and go with you, or later labeled by those names because they settled in the land after the Israelites moved on in their migrations. What do I mean? Well, you have these tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel, and they're migrating. Well, as they migrate, and if you will look at your migration maps, you're talking, they were migrating literally all over the globe. And by the way, today they are all over the globe. And as they migrated, and for a while they might be in this area, and there'd be other peoples that would come in and kind of move in beside them and mingle with them. And they would be called that too, because why? Because those are the people, those are the Kimeris. They're the Kimerians. They're Kimri. They're the Gomri, Komri. And they were not, but they lived with them, and so it's like, you may not be, for example, let me give you an example that you might relate to. In Ohio, and I know it because I grew up there. I was not born there. I was born right here in Stark County, but I grew up where my father and mother pastored in Guernsey County. Well, Guernsey County gets its name because the first people who moved into that area were from the Isle of Guernsey. Now, please hear me. We have people living in Guernsey County who are not descendants of the people who came from the Isle of Guernsey, including my first ancestor who came from Ireland. But if you look at those people, including my family, who did not come from the Isle of Guernsey, we're called, oh, they're from Guernsey County. Those are Guernsey County people. And believe me, if you grow up in southeastern Ohio, those are the kind of terms you get. Oh, you're from Guernsey County. You're Guernsey Countyans. You're Noble Countyans. You're from Monroe County. I don't know why they do the county thing, but they do. Down in my neck of the woods, we're country folk, and that's how you get labeled, your county. So that's what happened with other peoples, because they would move alongside or in the same areas with these people, and then they'd call them by those names. So in Note 26, each of the tribal names, each of them, can be found in variations through the centuries. And we're going to be looking at those. When we get through this section and we get through the history of the Yehudahites, which is the history of the tribe of Judah, and Jews, and we'll talk about how did we get the term Jew. Once we get through that, then we'll be looking at the individual tribes as we pull in all this information, and you'll see the different variations of the tribal names. Before class tonight, I was just sharing with some people that there is a tribe that actually ends up part of their people begin getting called by the area that they occupied in their land allotment. And because they lived in Gilead, later on they're known as Giladi, which morphs into something, and how it morphed into that is really strange when we get there. But they did. So also the sons, and here's where, when you trace the tribes, you will have to begin to spread out. Because each one of the sons of Jacob, Israel, had sons, right? Those sons and grandsons of the tribal patriarchs became the clans of each tribe. So you have clans. So, for example, Reuben, and I'm just using that because Reuben was the firstborn, because Reuben had 4 sons. You start now, you have the tribe of Reuben, but you have 4 sons of Reuben who become clans under Reuben. And guess what? Those sons have sons. So when you begin to trace the tribes, you're going to have to also trace the clans. And you can do it, because believe me, to this day, you've got clan names that are still prevalent today. So in researching the movements of and I say lost tribes, they are not lost. One, you have to watch for variations on the names of the clans. And it's fascinating. I'm just going to throw this out because there is one son who is named Gog. And that has led to great confusion because they think that it's one Gog. And some of you know where I'm heading at because we're looking at end time prophecy, but it's another Gog. That's all I'm going to say there. So you have to be very careful. But there is a clan name, and it's Gog. And it comes from one of the sons who had a clan, and it was the Gog clan. Okay, any question on the sons and then their sons and how the clans within the tribes come? Okay. Now I want to look at language evidence. All 12 of the ancient tribes of Israel, and kingdom of Israel and kingdom of Judah, after the split of the kingdom upon the death of Solomon, spoke Hebrew. And many of the Middle Eastern languages were closely related to it. Hebrew's not, by the way, Hebrew is not the only Semitic language. And some of you are with me, a few of you probably will admit you were with me when we studied Aramaic. And Aramaic would have actually been the spoken language. And that's why when there actually is some of the Old Testament, remember Daniel is translated in some Hebrew, but mostly Aramaic. So we can look then at Hebrew, and this is just a sidebar. I shared with the class before we went live tonight that I had gotten a book I had wanted for a long time. And it was kind of interesting because one of the things, and I had read what this particular author, Yair Davidi, had said years ago. And he had said that the language, he believes, and I have no reason to doubt that. I have no reason and way to confirm it. But he said that the language spoken prior to the Tower of Babel was Hebrew. And then, of course, the languages got confounded. I'm not saying that. I find that very interesting. I have no reason to think that wasn't the case or was the case, okay? I'm just saying I found it very interesting. We do know that there is a prophecy that says there will be a pure language that everyone will speak. I will say this, you and I will be able to understand one another during the millennium. And I don't care if you're watching us tonight from Israel, Europe, France, Germany, the Philippines. I don't care where you're watching us from, Russia, Ukraine, China, Afghanistan. In the millennium, we will understand one another. All I know is the prophecy is of a pure language, what it will be. But the neat thing is we won't have to sit in language class and try to struggle with Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, French, German. Those are all languages, by the way, that I've had to take and struggle with, and some of them more than others. And I'm not even going to tell you the story online about my struggle with French and that whole thing, other than the fact that I made a commitment, a 2-year commitment, wanted to drop out after 1 year. And my parents reminded me that I had made a 2-year commitment, and when you make a commitment, your word has to mean something. You're taking the 2nd year of French. I made it through, but needless to say, I didn't take any 3rd or 4th year of French. Okay, so linguistic studies from the 1700s, okay, through the late 1900s, and this is clear, and I will tell you this is clear, not because I speak Gaelic, but because I have family who do. Linguistic studies from the late 1700s through the late 1900s have found clear and direct connections between Hebrew and the Celtic or Gaelic languages still spoken in Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and the Isle of Man. Definite connection between Gaelic, Celtic, and Hebrew. Well, from what we already know, from what we've already looked at, how many know that makes sense? Because we know that the Zara branch of Judah, the Zara branch of Judah, the descendants, the sons of Zara, we know left Egypt early on and ended up where? They ended up in the area, they left Iberia. We believe they also spent a time in the Greek Isles, and there's evidence for that. But they ended up also, and they branched off into Turkey, which the area what is now Turkey. But they ended up in where? Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Do you remember the flag of Northern Ireland? The red hand, the red Star of David. So, very fascinating because, and are you aware that many, and this is a sidebar because I was just having a conversation last week with Pastor Dana, who had just come back from Ireland. And are you aware that many Christians that celebrate the feast of Israel, and don't really, we know that Jesus fulfilled them, but don't know why they continue. They say, well, we've just always done it. And many of the symbols, well, we've just always had those. We've always had those around. Well, why? Why do you eat certain foods? Well, we've just always done that. We've just done it down through our families. Well, and when we were sharing and he was selling all these things, he said they do. And they eat, and they celebrate, and they just, well, we've just always done that. And I just smiled. I said, now we know why. So now even the language, we know that the connections with the language. So those studies also discovered some fundamental commonalities between Anglo-Saxon English. Anglo-Saxon. If you were to go back, and if you can get, and hopefully I'm really praying that our pastor friend in California will get, has some of the most awesome collections of manuscripts, papyri, Bibles, in private hands. In fact, she has the largest collection of all of those in private hands in the world. There are larger collections, but they're in museums. And if you can read and see some of those Bibles in Old English, you're saying, there is a connection. If you can read. Now, some of you are relating because if you were in English, you had to try to read through Beowulf. How many remember two people remember Beowulf from senior English? Written in Old English. How about the Canterbury Tales? Ever hear of the Canterbury? Okay, a few more people remember those. And if you even would pick up a Tyndale Bible and try to read it, it's like, oh my goodness. But when you look at it, there is a relationship between Anglo-Saxon English and Hebrew. Syntax, and there's a reason, obviously there's a reason for that. So the same connection is seen in the core words for most of the Northwest, so if you can kind of look up Northwest, European languages. This is not unexpected, since those languages were fundamentally the same until 500 AD. Okay? They were the same until about 500 AD, when the modern nation states began to form, and then they began to change their languages more. And so there are many studies that link modern Northwest European English, Gaelic languages to the parent Hebrew language. There are many studies. You want to go online and you want to research that, you can, but they're linking. So there's a language evidence that as these tribes, because it had to come that way, As those tribes migrated, they brought with them remnants, because we said they'd forget their language, but there are just certain things. For example, you may have had Jewish, Yehudahite ancestry. You may not necessarily remember all the Hebrew words, but there may be some. If you basically are descended for European Jewry, you may remember Yiddish words, which is a blending, and they're there. And I'm trying to think of some, and unfortunately the only one I can think of, it's not a bad word, but it's Meshuggah, which means crazy. Meshuggah. I'm sorry, I do know other Yiddish words, they're just not coming to me right now, maybe because my brain's a little scrambled tonight. I know one. Kvetch. Just and that's why many times you'll have people who know Yiddish, they'd use stop kvetching and start stretching. But schlep. How many know what schlep means? It means to carry, lug things around. And I remember saying that to our Israel trip, but I can't remember which one it was. It was one where we actually flew to New York to one airport terminal and had to go to another one. And I said, I'm going to come up with some plan so we don't have to schlep luggage from one terminal to another. And it might have I don't know what year it was, but I remember, I think Sandy, it was your mom, and she looked at me, and she's the only one in the whole group that knew what I meant. And they just all looked at me like, what? And then I had to explain it. So what I'm saying is, you begin to take words and what? They morph in, and you borrow words, and then you add words. Well, that's kind of what's happened, and that's why these studies link European languages, English, Gaelic languages, to a parent language, which we believe to have been Hebrew. So now we're going to look at art history language, or I'm looking at that clock and I'm looking at this one. Can someone tell me the time? Because I have two different times here and there.
7:38.
7:38, we can do art history language, or art history evidence. So art historians can identify historical paintings and other art pieces, okay? They can look at them, and they can discuss at length the era, in other words, the time, and the culture of the art. And if you're into art, you know that somebody will say, well, this was early, this early 1700 period when this was painted. Now, as a result, art history can provide direct visual, V-I-S-U-A-L, visual access to archaeological evidence of the ancient past. Because these tribes left things behind. They left artistic things behind. Whether it was paintings, whether it was, pictures on caves, they left them. So the Scythian, Sumerian art forms clearly reveal a common culture. Now, we have found what are called hard art pieces. And those are things that are done in gold, silver, bronze, stone, and pottery. Those are art forms. And they have survived for modern archaeologists to find. And these pieces define the characteristic Scythian, what we call animal style. They call it, in other words, if you're seeing something that was done as an animal. Let's say, well, we know that was Scythian. So with a magnificent understanding of composition and the essential nature of the material, craftsmen fashion utilitarian objects. Those are things you would use. Utilitarian objects are things you use and sometimes use every day. And they have found these in animal form. And animals, and you need to understand a culture, animals were considered to have magical power and to provide protection against evil or disaster, and representations of them occupied an important place in life. We also know that animals also had a significance as being symbols of families, or this one, symbols of tribes, right? There were animal symbols. For example, the ox is a symbol. The lion is a symbol. So artifacts which have been found include weaponry, okay, weapons. They would have certain things put on their weapon. Horse trappings, that was, the reins, all the things you would use with a horse. Clothes, ornaments, and jewelry. And they have also found other everyday objects that were decorated with animal motifs. And so their art accurately conveyed the essence of and every beast. There's actually two words there. Every beast depicted.
Every what?
Beast, B-E-A-S-T, so every animal depicted. In other words, these art forms from this time, evidently they were fascinated with animals. And so these zoomorphic motifs were used not simply for decorative effect, and I can tell, I can sense from the feedback I'm getting from your look. You need to remember something, because right away I was like, well, that's idolatry. If they thought these amulets and these art objects had some kind of special power, but what was the sin of which the northern kingdom, both the southern and northern, but primarily at the time they were exiled, what were they guilty of? Idol worship, idolatry, going after false gods. So you can understand, they go into captivity and they go into a nation, they're exiled to a nation that worships false gods. So successively, what's going to happen, I would have to simply say, look at our culture today, and look, I'm just going to be blunt. Look at how much of the world and the world's ideas have crept into the church world.
Oh.
And so when you understand these zoomorphic motifs were not used simply for decorative effect, but to turn the object into amulets with magical power to assist in hunting. So I'm going to take my little thing with me, and we'll wear it around my neck, wear it around my wrist. That's going to help me in my hunting and to protect the owner from harm. I'm simply going to say, here we are living in 2022. Do people still do that? Yes, they do. Oh my goodness. And by the way, do you realize in our day, when people wear crosses for any other reason than they actually, in a way, if you'd understand the wearing, I do not believe first century Christians wore crosses. And the reason why, it would be tantamount to you wearing a gallows or an electric chair around your neck.
Yeah.
No, I'm not being blasphemous. I want you to hear what I'm saying. Because in that day, it was a sign of execution. It was a sign of disgrace. And that's why it was understand it was not a loved symbol. We have a different view of the cross today. If it wasn't for the cross, where would we be? Dead in our trespasses and sins, lost. But in that day, okay, it was not that, which is why one of the first symbols of Christianity was the fish. That's how Christians identified one another. We know that. But you can see how these people from these tribes would have fallen right into that. Because they were guilty. And I mean, it wasn't very long before they were guilty of that. And God even told them, these people that you're going into, you drive them out, because if you do not drive them out, they will be a snare to you. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. So when one thinks of the use of the animal-shaped art as idolatrous amulets, remember that God sent the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel into captivity precisely because of their idolatry. And I want to stop here because I'm not going to get all the art in, but I want to read the scripture. Let's look at 2 Kings. 2 Kings 17. Second Kings 17, verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria, took Samaria and carried Israel away to Assyria, and placed them in Hala and by the Haber, the river of Gosen, and in the cities of the Medes. And right by the way, the river of Gosen is an area near what is today Baghdad, Iraq. For so it was that the children of Israel, and here's the key, why was he able to take them? For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against their Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods. By the way, you don't have to fear any other gods. They're false gods. Only God is omnipotent. Only God is omniscient. So you don't need any amulet or good luck charm to ward away all the evil. Do you understand? God had promised them so much, and they settled for so little. And then look at verse 12. For they served idols. Serve them. And by the way, whatever you worship, you'll serve. You'll end up serving. For they served idols, of which the Lord had said to them, you shall not do this thing. And that's why, and unfortunately, when they migrated, they took some of these habits with them. But things happened along the way. And the one thing I will tell you that happened centuries and centuries and centuries later, even when these people were migrated, and that is the gospel was taken to those areas. And it's just it's an awesome story. And please don't ever forget this. And this is the one thing we can be thankful for this Thanksgiving. God's hand is still on his people. And his hand is still on history. He's still involved in history. And what he has declared will be brought to pass. He said it. And today I am thankful for that promise that he has said, faithful is he who called you, who shall also bring it to pass. Do you know what he is bringing to pass in your life and my life and in the life of all those he called who answered his call? He said, I will present you complete and perfect before the Father. He's doing, his hand is still on us. His hand is still working in us. And we can be so grateful and so thankful. Thank you for tuning into class tonight. Don't forget, we will not be here next week, but we will be right back here the week after Thanksgiving, looking at you and hoping you'll be looking at us as we open the Word of God. So be thankful, and God bless you real good.